Welcome to the Evoke cast. I'm Leif Whittaker, and today I am delighted to be joined by my colleague Mark Postle for a journey up the highest peak in South America. In addition to coaching, Mark is an experienced mountain guide who has led over 50 expeditions worldwide, including multiple ascents of Aconcagua. Today, Mark and I will be taking you on a step-by-step climb of this 22,840-foot mountain. We will talk about route choices, guided versus unguided expeditions, and give you some training advice. Then we will walk you through the entire process of climbing the mountain, including the approach trek, load carries to successively higher camps, and the summit attempt. We will jump off on some tangents and fun games along the way and provide as much information as we can. If we don't cover everything, and I'm sure we won't, and you want to learn more, check out Mark and Coach Larry Goldie's discussion of Aconcagua from a few years ago. It was episode number 51 of the Evoke cast. And of course, you can always reach out to us through our website, forums, or social media accounts if you have specific questions or need help training for your climb. So, Mark, welcome to the show. Thanks for tying in with me today and leading us all up the mountain. And to start us off, in a few words, can you give the audience a feel for what Aconcagua is all about?
Yeah, thanks, Leif. Happy to be on today. When I think about Aconcagua, I think about a couple of things. If we're gonna do it briefly, I guess the primary one for me would probably be altitude. It's a high peak. It's challenging to operate in that environment. The air is thin. But I also think about wind. It can be a breezy peak. And actually, lastly, one of the things that I always think about are long days, because it's climbed in what are our winter, and their summer. So it was always an interesting kind of change of pace to December, short, cold days, as you remember, rainy in the Northwest, and you go down there and all of a sudden it's light till 9:30 at night. So that was always really striking for me. Long days down there. It's a great trip.
I think you hit all the good little highlights there of altitude and wind. The one I'll add is steak, because the trip to Mendoza, Argentina has some amazing food and the travel experience is so cool. It's such a fun part of the trip up Aconcagua. But I think that wind and altitude are the big factors. It's the highest mountain outside the Himalaya, which makes it a really good test for high altitude. If you're going to a peak in the Himalaya, it's a great way to test yourself and see what it's like to get up to almost 7,000 meters, almost 23,000 feet. It's one of the seven summits, the highest peak on each of the seven continents, and it's a really popular climb for that reason. So yeah, I'm excited to chat with you, Mark, and learn from you. And I think maybe to start off, it would help listeners to think about which route they want to go for, and sort of talk about the different routes on the mountain because there's several different options, usually even offered by guide services. Um, and so just maybe covering a few of those, there's the normal route. There's the kind of 360, the traverse of the mountain. You'll also hear it called the Polish traverse or and then there's the Polish direct, which is a more technical route. So maybe could you go in just to a little bit of detail on each of those routes?
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's a good amount of confusion among those routes, and some of it has to do with the nomenclature because not everybody uses the same nomenclature to mean exactly the same thing. So I think in its outset, the probably the most important thing to differentiate is between what I'll call the Polish direct or the Polish glacier route, where you're actually climbing on the glacier, and all the other routes that you mentioned, right? So let's separate those two. The Polish direct ascends the direct version of the Polish glacier route, and that is as significantly more arduous and technical undertaking than all the other routes, which the other routes that you mentioned all have a common summit day. So the way you get to high camp is different, but the summit day is the same and sort of the path of least resistance. Whereas the Polish Direct starts from a little bit lower, so it's a bigger summit day, and it is much more technical terrain. In recent years, the most technical bits of the Polish Direct have been fixed. They have fixed lines on them, so that makes retreat a little easier. It makes it a little more appropriate for people that are maybe close to their limit and that kind of terrain. But it does have sort of snow and ice difficulties on the glacier up to between 50 and 60 degrees in angle. So it's it feels quite steep when you're on the mountain. It's not just walking on the glacier anymore. So that's the Polish Direct. That has become a little bit popular for folks that want an added challenge, and or folks that are maybe using Aconcagua as a training climb for greater peaks like in the Himalayas, where they're going to need to climb in that style and want something a little more arduous. But it's a significant step up in my mind in difficulty from the more normal routes. So it's important to understand that. And then in a nutshell, the other routes you described, one goes up the normal route, obviously, through Plaza de Mulas. That was, the route that got used the most for years and years and years, and still is probably the most popular route. The other route comes up through Plaza Argentina on sort of on the opposite side of the mountain towards the Polish glacier, but then skirts around it or traverses under it, hence the name Polish Traverse. And what's been popularized a lot in the last 10 to 15 years is this sort of link up of these two previous routes, which were the Polish Traverse and the Old Guanacos route, which is no longer open because it's kind of considered wilderness, where the layout of the camps is a little more logical. You get to the normal high camp, you summit from there, and then you descend the normal route and come out the normal way. So essentially you make a traverse of the mountain, but you also to some degree circumnavigate the mountain a little bit. And that's where the 360 nomenclature comes in. You're traversing it, but you also end up kind of going all the way around it because you come out at a different trailhead. And that was a route that I guided a lot. I was one of the guys that was guiding the Guanacos route early on. I was familiar with those upper camps and kind of helped figure out that we could connect those two in a more logical way. And that's just grown and grown in popularity, and is actually a really nice way to kind of see the mountain and climb all that terrain.
Thank you for clarifying because I was confused. All the
Yeah,
different
it's quite
ways to,
confusing.
yeah. But that gives us a really good overview with the Polish Direct being that higher technical challenge and more arduous climb, and then those other two common options. Um, it sounds like each of them have their sort of pros and cons. And the majority of people are going via that normal route via Plaza de Mulas or the Vacas Valley, right, via Plaza de Argentina. And those meet up, like you said,
Yep.
around High Camp. Is that somewhere around High Camp? Those meet up and then share the
Yeah,
same summit.
yeah, they all share the same summit day. And high camp on Aconcagua is actually there's a couple of little zones in the same zip code. So you'll hear it referred to as Cholera, Berlin, White Rocks. There's a few little camp spots there that aren't technically the same camp, but they're close enough together that essentially it's irrelevant. So they join up there, and then from there they have a common summit day, and then you can also descend either side of the mountain, whether you're making the traverse or retracing your steps, whichever way you came up. And I would say that some years ago, the majority of the folks were overwhelmingly climbing on the normal route, whereas
Mm.
now there's a lot of guide service that are offering trips, yeah, like you say, through Plaza Argentina on that side, and on one of these Polish variants on that side of the mountain, which it's probably still a little quieter than the normal route, but I think it's probably almost sixes experientially for people now.
Well, I think we'll probably mostly stick to the normal route here in our discussion, and we may just kind of bounce around a little and talk about some of those other routes as well. But just because most folks are heading to that normal route up the mountain, we'll kind of mostly stay there with our step-by-step climb. And the other thing I think it's worth maybe just talking about briefly is deciding between a guided trip or an unguided trip. And I think this is something that a lot of people debate and think about, and maybe we could just go back and forth and sort of talk about some of the different aspects or pros and cons of, hey, why would you think about going guided? And if you have the skills and the experience, what's the benefit of unguided?
Yeah, that's a good thing to start out the discussion with, I think. And and just in recent years, I've coached several athletes that have climbed it on their own, and also obviously several that have been guided. So I've had this discussion with individual folks. I do think on one hand that Aconcagua is a fairly reasonable objective for folks that have the requisite skill set to climb unguided, because there is a good amount of support. There's very little overhead hazard, no crevasse hazard, things like that as far as traveling solo. So, those are boxes that you want to think about checking. The the downside or the reasons not to go solo is I think that a guide's experience there in kind of pacing the trip and making judgments about weather and things like that with the altitude can really benefit people. Um, and also at the end of the day, if you price out the trip, because I think cost is a factor in some of these decisions, it's actually not one of these trips that's wildly cheaper to do on your own by the time that you end up going through the logistical situation and paying for it on your own that you're undoubtedly going to want. Certainly it's less expensive, but those logistical packages are not super inexpensive, and bang for your buck. I think for most folks, unless it's a climbing style discussion or they're trying to progress to a bigger peak that they know that they're going to climb unguided, I think it's actually a very, in my opinion, it's a very good peak to be guided on if you're kind of on the fence.
That makes a lot of sense. I agree. And I think especially the points you touched on of the logistical support from a guide service just makes the process of going down there, the planning so much easier. You just have to deal with your own gear, get trained as well as you can, and show up in good shape. And the rest of the logistics are pretty straightforward and taken care of by the guide service. There's no better way to learn than from a guide. We've said this before, but going up on a mountain with an experienced guide who's up to date on all the current techniques and safety procedures is the best way to learn about mountaineering, learn about expedition lifestyle, what it's like to be at high altitude, and do everything we're going to be talking about today. So I completely agree. I think it's a great option to go with a guide service. The one thing that I would say that I've, heard some feedback from folks and seen over the years with guide services is the sense of fulfillment can be different than if you organize a trip yourself and say you and a few friends set everything up and go through this entire process. Hey, if you finally get to the summit and kind of do that all on your own, that sense of fulfillment is powerful. It really is a little different than going with a guide service. So, if you have some friends or partners that can go do it and want to put that together, yeah, it sure does make it fun. The other thing is just you then have more control over your teammates. And sometimes on guided trips, right, you don't know who you're going to be with, and that can be wonderful where you meet some, amazing friends and lifelong climbing partners, but you can also kind of have some conflict or difficulty among the team on guided groups. So those are all, I think factors to take into consideration if you're thinking about one option or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have had a few athletes over recent years also do, private or semi-custom trips down there where, they have a climbing partner or two maybe that they enjoy climbing with, and they organize a closed group, where it's just those folks. with a guide. So that's an option that's available through some companies down there that might be worth exploring if you want to keep the group a little tighter, but you also want the benefit of going on a guided trip. So there's some middle ground there for sure.
Excellent. Well, let's jump into a few training points, huh? I think since we're at the beginning of the climb, let's imagine you've signed up for a climb with a guide or organized your own trip, and now you're getting into the thick of training. You've got that date on your calendar. I want to get into our step-by-step journey up this mountain, so I don't want to spend too long on the training, and some of this is probably going to be repeated, but maybe we could go back and forth, Mark, and just pick like kind of pick maybe three each and just quick points about what are sort of our favorite or most important training elements to prepare for Aconcagua.
Yeah.
I'll
So
let you go first.
yeah,
First pick.
I not necessarily my top one, but definitely my top three would be some kind of higher intensity training that forces you into a sort of a respiratory rate that exceeds what you would do in normal zone two training. And because it's so high, you definitely see this sort of decoupling of heart rate and respiratory rate that we see at altitude with folks. And and it's also experientially when I was there a lot of times, and also guiding folks, your respiratory rate is so high, even if you're moving at an appropriate pace. Like you are breathing hard all day. And I really like some component of the training to incorporate that. And I think, yeah, harder, short duration intervals of some form are really a favorite of mine and for that kind of objective for sure.
You put that so well, the decoupling of your heart rate and breathing. Oh, that's man, that right there is a nugget because it's some people are really surprised like I'm my heart rate's not that high, but I'm breathing like I'm in zone four.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good one. I'll take the low-hanging fruit of a heavy muscular endurance hike. Um,
Yeah.
this is kind of that final piece in the specific period of your training when you bring it all together. And the best way to, I think, perform these for Aconcagua, we want you to be as specific as you can. So that is putting a heavy pack on your shoulders and finding some steep terrain and going hard uphill. Usually these workouts are perhaps 45 to 60 minutes of hard work time with a warm up and cool down on either side. And you can certainly add some time if you're outdoors and want to complete the trail. But often we'd say, hey, drop that weight after those 60 minutes of hard push and or cut it in half and just go easy the rest of the time. But that hard effort in those muscular endurance hikes, man, that really pays off in that final phase, especially if you're already have a big foundation of fitness.
Yeah, I'd agree. Those ME workouts, ME style workouts are super important. And I would say especially there is a bit of a I think an important nuance worth mentioning here that some Aconcagua trips are completely self-supported in that you're carrying your own gear the whole time, and then some will include porters for some of the group gear and for the move days. And so make sure that you understand what your trip involves. And I think it's probably prudent that an athlete is doing some ME work either way, but especially if it's a self-supported trip where you're not using any porters, the pack weight's going to be significantly more. And just to have you ready and strong in that way that you can do those move days with a big pack and still have plenty of gas in the tank for a summit day, I think is super important. So yeah, I think you're right on with that. The last thing I would say, if we're going to pick a third one, and this is maybe a little bit of a I'll wrap two into one. Um, this I've always found the summit day to be quite long. It can literally be quite long, and it just feels really long at that altitude. So making sure that you're getting in a nice long day, almost weekly as part of your training, maybe a little longer long day than normal, and or the occasional back to back to kind of build out the volume in a weekend. And when you can, that long day should include a pretty significant amount of descending in real terrain outside. There's a lot of vertical from from the trailhead to the summit. And because you're double carrying a lot of these camps where you'll cache, then come back and spend another night and then move, there's a lot of descending that happens during the trip as you're bouncing back and forth between camps. And if you're not ready for that descending, the load and the from that and the kind of damage from that eccentric loading on the way down can build up even before summit day. You're not only concerned about getting from the top of the mountain down to base camp, it's while you're working your way up. So just being ready for that long duration and particularly the descending, especially on those cache days, is important, I think.
Those are all really good points. I think the point about the long day is really well taken, and then like you said, that eccentric strength, that downhill strength. Just to throw out kind of piggyback on that, you can focus on that in your strength workouts as well. It takes just a little bit of a change in strategy in the strength workouts to really focus on the eccentric portion of the movement, that down portion, and take a few seconds on your step downs to slowly lower in control and then drive back up with force. 3 seconds down, 1 second up is a good rhythm to try to repeat in the gym if you're working on eccentric strength in the gym. The other thing I'll just quickly throw out is core stability. It is a really heavy climb, and often the heaviest loads are on the way down, like you said, when you're kind of cleaning your
Yeah.
camps and carrying everything down. So to have some real good core stability to be able to move downhill with a heavy load on your pack on rough terrain, that Scott's Killer core routine or any specific routine that you can put yourself through to really work on your core stability, I think will serve you well on Aconcagua. Okay, so let's jump into this step-by-step climb.
Yeah.
Uh, you've trained your tail off. You're in the best shape of your life, and you're about to depart for Argentina. Like Mark mentioned, a typical climbing season is December to February, the South American summer, and the flight down to Mendoza, Argentina, is really long from almost everywhere in the northern hemisphere. So get prepared for a long trip down to Argentina. Try to keep yourself loose on those after long days in the plane. One thing I like to do is just walk the airports to loosen my legs. Don't get off the plane and then sit in a chair for another 2 hours while you're changing flights. Get some exercise, move around the airport, clear out that fatigue from your legs. And yeah, when you get down there, man, enjoy Mendoza because it is such a beautiful city. It's one of the I just think about my trip there and how wonderful that city is. So like get ready for a fun travel experience too.
Yeah, I think it's so nice to roll into a city like that where the days are long. There's parks you can walk in. Sections of the sort of downtown area are closed off to traffic, so they make great walking. Uh, One thing I would say that I've seen a lot is one of the normal itineraries to fly down there connects through Santiago, Chile, and then you bump over to Mendoza, and commonly there's an airline switch there in Santiago, and they love to hold on to your luggage for an extra day there for reasons I've never understood. So a lot of times with these big trips, but especially with this one, because of the sort of joys of spending a little bit of time in Mendoza, it's not unpleasant at all. I always encourage folks to go down a day early if they can. It gives you a little extra time, especially if you're coming from the West Coast, you're changing more time zones. You can kind of adjust a little bit with that. And then it gives you a sort of a slush day if you get separated from your luggage, and it gives it 24 hours for it to catch up before you need to do any gear checks or anything, because I've seen that quite a few times down there. So just kind of adds a little bit of a lowered level of stress to the whole beginning of the trip, which I think is important. So yeah, if you can afford to tear yourself away from whatever you got going on at home a day earlier than you're supposed to meet, I think that's time well spent for folks.
Good advice. And I would just suggest enjoying the food in Mendoza. It's really known for its steak and Malbec. I wouldn't necessarily drink too much Malbec before your trip, but if you're if you're a vegetarian, cover your ears. But if you're a carnivore, man, that the steak down there is really, really good. And not bad to load up some extra protein before a trip. There's some, carb load as well. So don't be afraid of eating too much. You're going to burn a ton of calories on this expedition. Enjoy yourself in Mendoza. You'll meet your team here typically. Meet your guide if you haven't met them yet. Um, Maybe would you sometimes go through a little gear check here, Mark, and just chat with the group there and
Yeah.
make sure everything's in order?
Yeah, a pretty thorough gear check actually, just because with any of these backcountry trips, once you get into the environment, it's hard to scare up equipment. You can if you have to, but just making sure that everybody brought the things on the list, everybody grabbed the things they thought they brought, myself included. And
Right.
sometimes that's an individual basis. Sometimes you can go down in the courtyard of the hotel and everybody explode their gear and just make sure you're on the same page. And then it's also a bit of gear sorting too, because a lot of those things you don't need until later in the trip. So it's for me, it's not only making sure you have the right things, but it's helping people pack in a way that the things they don't need right away are going to maybe go straight to base camp, or at least you don't have to open that duffel unless something unusual happens. And then you're only kind of faffing around with half of your stuff during the trek. And it just kind of simplifies things a little bit. So yeah, absolutely. Gear sorting, dining, and just relaxing and kind of shaking off the jet lag and getting ready to head up the mountain.
After a few days in Mendoza, or maybe just a day, you'll make the drive toward the trailhead, the Aconcagua starting point. It's usually a 3, 4 hour drive. Often stop for lunch along the way, take in the scenery, start to get excited, and then typically you'll spend a night close to the trailhead in like the town of Penitentes. Get your last real meal in that hotel, last night in a bed, and maybe hand off some gear to the mule team that'll be carrying, like you said, a lot of those loads, either all the way up to base camp or carrying some of your gear along the way. Um, yeah, I think that last night is really fun. There's a lot of excitement in the air. You're thinking about the long hikes the next day. So yeah, enjoy that moment of the climb, and keep yourself healthy, keep yourself prepared for what's to come. And then the next day, start next day right in that morning, and start on the way up toward the mountain. Usually there's, let's see, 3 or 4 days of approach trekking. Is that right, Mark? Something like
Yeah.
that to get up to base camp.
Yeah. So one of the other things too, that the night at the quote unquote trailhead is not literally a trailhead, but it gives you a night of acclimatization too. Or because that's, depending on where you stay there, we'll say it's in that 8 to 9,000 foot zip code, which for most people is high. And Mendoza is actually quite low, so that gives you a little bit of a jump start in the acclimatization. And there are trips that occasionally will go straight to the trailhead on the normal route and the morning, and you go all the way in that first day. But I think if you can spend a night there at the trailhead, it kind of gives you a little bit of a jump start in the acclimatization. And then, yeah, 3 days typically into base camp, and that's certainly true on the normal route. Actually, only two of those days are moving days. So most folks will hike into Confluencia, which is sort of the first camp on the way in, and it's actually fairly short day the first day, which is kind of nice. And then most folks will take an acclimatization day that second day, which is sort of a active rest day. If you're doing well, you can hike up towards the big sheer south face of Aconcagua, from that camp, which is a really nice take in. And of course, their south faces are our north faces. So that's some of the hardest routes on the mountain are on that side. And then the third day you would walk up to Plaza de Mulas on the normal route. And that's a little over 4,000 meters, a little over 14,000 feet. So at least you've had a couple nights to work your way up to that elevation, but there's still pretty big jumps. If you go on the other side, on the Polish side, still 3 days. They're all moving days. You use two different camps. But effectively the base camp elevations on the both sides of the mountain are the same. They're within 100 meters of each other. And you can, then acclimate your way up that side as well. So yeah, 3 days and all of a sudden you're at 14,000 feet.
Wow, it's a fast itinerary, especially if you're coming all the way from sea level. And like you said, that trailhead on the north on the normal side is about 9,000 9,500 feet, little lower on the Polish side. And then yeah, you're making it all the way up to 14,000 plus feet in just 3 days. So pretty brisk ascent up to altitude there. If you're not, pre-acclimatized or coming from altitude like Colorado or something like that, you're probably going to feel this altitude, especially sleeping. So I think it would make sense to maybe jump in here, Mark, maybe about a few sort of tips or maybe some myths that we could bust about altitude. Or tips that we have. We could just jump back and forth, three or four tips of sort of strategies for acclimatization or things not to worry about or myths that that we can sort of bust here along the way. What comes to mind for you?
One, I think, thing that's kind of grown in lore to become a myth, and it's sort of a pet peeve of mine, and this I feel like it's a little bit unpopular, so people don't want to talk about it, is that hydration solves altitude sickness. And I think it's important to understand that if you're struggling with altitude, being dehydrated is problematic, right? Of course, being dehydrated is problematic for athletic endeavors that are at low altitude. But once you are fully hydrated, being extra hydrated is not going to solve your problems. The altitude is still the altitude. If you've done something that's inappropriate, for your body with rate of ascension, it's not going to help. And you can even get yourself into a situation where commonly when you're struggling with altitude, you don't want to eat. It's hard to keep food down, so you're not taking in nutrients. That's a sort of a moderate to trending towards a severe sign of AMS. And a lot of those people can keep down water. And so you can get into the situation where you're just drinking water only. You can't really keep nutrients down. And you're actually diluting what nutrients you have in your bloodstream, and you can actually do yourself a disservice. So you take that with a grain of salt. Like, I'm not implying that you shouldn't be hydrated, because of course you should be hydrated, but it is not the solution to the ends of the earth to be drinking a gallon of water at every sitting thinking you're going to solve your altitude related issues. So that's probably my biggest myth bust / pet peeve.
What do you think's a good target? Like 2 liters during the day while you're moving, and then maybe a liter during the rest of the day to try to, replenish anything you've lost sweating if it's particularly hot. Something like that,
Yeah.
about 3 liters a
Yeah,
day.
obviously there's some individual variation here depending on the size of the individual, how much they sweat, their respiratory rate.
Hmm.
Fitter people will just drink less, but I think middle of the bell curve is, certainly some fluids in the morning, maybe as much as a liter over the course of a morning,
Mm.
2 liters during the day, and then at least a liter at night. So if you're getting down, yeah, three, probably knocking on 4 liters all in over the
Yep.
course of the day, I think that's probably middle of the bell curve. And just understand that you're probably going to lie a little bit on one side or the other of that, and that's okay.
And
But yeah,
that and
just
that
forcing
does
down
Yeah, that does take active
for sure.
hydration to pay attention to it. But I think it's a really good point about not overhydrating, not getting up all night long to pee 5 times in the night.
Yeah.
All those things. I'll throw out this sort of myth that I hear. I think I've done it many times in the past. Just sort of, it's like I don't know where it comes from, if it's just naturally the way we think about things, but it's that going hard at a new altitude helps your acclimatization. And
Oh yeah,
by
that's a
go,
great one.
yeah, like I don't know why I used to think that, but it was like, okay, I'm at, 12,000 feet here. I've gained 2,000 feet in the last day. So the way that I need to get myself stronger is to go charge another 1,500 feet up a hillside as hard as I can with my heart rate in zone three, uh, and just kill myself. And that's somehow going to make me stronger when we get higher on the mountain. No, no, the opposite really is true. I think when you go to that intensity, especially when your body's under the stress of acclimatizing, all you're doing is adding more unnecessary stress to the system. Your body's working hard to acclimatize. It has to adapt to this lack of oxygen. So don't add unnecessary stress. There's plenty of stress on the normal process of climbing. And the other thing that do is it opens you up to illness. I think it weakens your immune
Yeah.
system. And if you go really hard at a high altitude and you come back completely exhausted, it just makes you more susceptible to all the kind of side problems that can happen on these expeditions. So keep it slow and steady early on. Try to, really regulate your pacing, avoid that competitiveness with your teammates. I bet you see it all the time as a guide, Mark, of
Yeah.
people wanting to really show how good their fitness is early on in a trip and really trying to charge those first days. But the folks often who take it slow and steady early on in a trip end up in better shape at the end.
Yeah, I always like to say they don't hand out the summit certificates when you get to base camp. There's no prizes for being the first one into base camp, and I I do think your point is well taken there. And the way I think about it is you just have a really limited amount of recovery at these altitudes. So anything you do that adds drain is going to be problematic because you won't completely bounce back. So just trying to be thoughtful about where you're sort of just sort of where you're burning those matches. You only have so many at the beginning of the trip, and you can't buy unlimited supply more. So it's sort of like having a cell phone charger that kind of works, but it's kind of on the fritz. You can get a few percent back here and there, but you don't ever get back to 100. And that's the way I think about it at altitude. So certainly staying within yourself on the approach, and making sure that you arrive to camp each evening, with some reserve so that you can, get fed, get hydrated, and bounce back as best you can for the next day, I think is super important on these. And it's hard. And in these group settings, you almost naturally can't help but gauge yourself based on how other people in the group are doing. And, there's a lot of folks that want to be, in that front group, first ones rolling into camp, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, you might be careful with that. One of the one of the other things that I used to see more, and I fell victim to it a lot as well, is on a lot of these altitude trips, people will be using the pulse oximeters to measure their SpO2, their blood saturation with oxygen, and inevitably once whether it's I carried one for years and would measure everybody's every morning and evening and write it down in my write in the rain notebook. And inevitably you also have this comparison game, kind of like the pacing as well, where is my number higher or lower than your number? And the pulse oximeter is a great tool in certain instances, and you can use it for some good diagnostic things if you're concerned about altitude sickness. But the reality is it's physiology. We all vary, and people will weather hypoxia significantly differently. And you can have somebody that's in the mid 80s outperforming somebody that's in the mid 90s. So if you are using the pulse oximeter, to always take those numbers with a grain of salt, and don't play the comparison game with other members in the party if you can help it.
Along those same lines, I think what you said about altitude affects everyone differently, and the individual nature of it is really, I mean, I know you see it as a guide, like how differently people adapt to altitude. And I think one assumption which it sort of makes sense is that the fitter, if I'm fit, I'm not going to be affected by altitude. Yes, fitness does generally mean you're going to perform better at altitude, and being really fit gives you an advantage. Your body is probably going to adapt better to high altitude. but that doesn't mean that you're not susceptible to AMS, high altitude pulmonary or cerebral edema. So, thinking that you're super fit and therefore you're going to crush the altitude, won't feel it at all. No, it really can affect people differently. Sometimes folks who you think maybe aren't the fittest in the group, they just do better at altitude for whatever reason. Their individual physiology just adapts to altitude better, and it is one of the biggest challenges on this mountain. So it hits everyone, no
100%.
matter how fit you are. So go into it expecting that, and really be conscious of it, and don't just assume that you're not going to get hit by the altitude.
Yeah, for sure. The fitness piece of it is something that's in your control, so you certainly want to maximize it, but it doesn't change your genetics. And I think that one of the things you see on Aconcagua is it's a lot of climbers' first foray into these kind of elevations. Um, you know, Ideally they've done some training and included some goal climbs that have gotten them close to this, but unless you've been in the Himalayas, you haven't been above 23,000 feet. And um, a lot of people they just don't know at this point in their career arc as a climber kind of how their body generally responds to altitude. And there's a little bit of a learning process here. So I think that, staying open-minded about even if you're super fit, about the potential for you not to do amazingly, and, keep an eye out for those early signs of altitude sickness, and kind of adjust your pacing accordingly is super, super important, especially on this peak. Absolutely.
Altitude sucks, man. It hurts. It's
Yeah.
hard. I mean, it's not fun even for the fittest people out there. So don't underestimate it. Okay, well, I think we gave some really good pointers there on acclimatization and just kind of how to take that as you go along the way. Now you've been up at base camp probably for a few days now at 14,000 feet. Often you'll get a rest or active recovery day there at base camp. And then you start to begin the process of moving higher up the mountain. Um, I think it would be good just to kind of go over the like cache and carry rhythm of this climb. You touched on it earlier, Mark, but it's something, a lot of folks might not be aware of those, the idea of double carries. And how you make your way up a big mountain like this, stalking your camp along the way. So could you kind of walk us through that process a little bit of how it goes on an expedition like this, of gradually making your way higher?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, I think Aconcagua is probably sort of the poster child for that sort of cash and carry routine. And so what you're doing effectively is each day, let's say you're starting at base camp, you would carry some number of items that you don't need at that moment, extra food, extra fuel, sometimes extra warm gear that you're not going to need till on the upper mountain. And ideally you carry about half of your kit up, and you would leave it at camp one and come back down and spend another night at the lower camp. And then, maybe you take a rest day whenever on a subsequent day, then you take the other half of the things, now including your tent, your sleeping bag, all the things you need to have with you, and you move to that camp. And this kind of achieves two things simultaneously, which is why it works great. It reduces your pack weight by 50% because you're splitting the load on 2 different days, which is welcome for most people. And it also gives you a nice, more gentle rhythm for acclimatization, so that you get a little bit of exposure to the altitude during the day while you're up there, come back down, sleep low, ideally recover as thoroughly as possible, and then you move up to that upper camp, and expose your body to the altitude for real. And you just keep repeating that process. And in general, on these routes on Aconcagua, you're going to use basically 3 camps effectively above base camp. So, with no rest days, that alone is going to be 6 days of travel to get to that high camp. And you certainly have some rest days in there, as opposed to just 3 rest days. If you just move, your body just wouldn't be able to adjust as fast, or sufficiently for the coming summit day. So yeah, it's a really popular way of climbing, and Aconcagua tends to lend itself to exactly that perfect rhythm of just like cash move, cash move, cash move, on those days, and it is also welcome to have that lighter pack on a lot of those days for sure.
And that it's a process that you use on a lot of other big peaks, Denali being a prime example. And so, yeah, learning that how that works, learning kind of how to partition off your gear, right? And select the things that you can leave up higher on the mountain. Of course, the benefit of a guide service, you get a lot of assistance with figuring out, hey, how much fuel are we bringing up? All those sorts of little details of logistics, knowing that you have all the equipment that you need, carrying it up the mountain with you. Um, that climb high, sleep low adage, like you talked about, that's a great way to acclimatize. And yeah, it takes, yeah, say 6 or 8 days if everything's just going perfectly to get up to a high camp and be in position for the summit at 19,500 feet, something like that is where many of the high camps are. What's a typical pack weight on these days, Mark? Is it, I mean, I know you mentioned the difference between porters and not porters, so that, if you're able to have the assistance of porters, that's definitely going to cut your pack weight. I remember my pack being pretty heavy on Aconcagua,
Mm-hmm.
something like on the uphill in the 45 to 55 pound range. Is that about right?
Yeah, I kind of counsel people to be ready to carry a 55-pound pack a lot of times on Aconcagua for an unported trip. If you pack smartly, it should be a little less than that, but it definitely can approach those. And of course, as you cache and carry, in the beginning to go to camp one, you can cache a lot of stuff. So because you have the luxuries of base camp, so your cache day might actually be pretty heavy, whereas your move day might only be 40, 45 pounds. But as you go up the mountain, because it gets colder and you can't be as aggressive about caching stuff, it ends up that your move days are a little heavier than your cache days, and you can definitely be in that 50-pound range. And then of course, like you mentioned earlier in the discussion, at some point you're done and you're not going to double carry down. So in the absence of portering, uh, you're loading up everything that's left and carrying it down the mountain, probably and hopefully on quite fatigued legs from the summit day the day before. And that is honestly, as far as eccentric loading, like one of the harder days that I did with any regularity. And it's also just a lot of vertical. It's not quite 6,000 feet of descending, but it certainly feels like it. And with that big load, it's hard. And one of my a lot of the trips I guided had sort of optional portering where some you could get a porter if you wanted or not if you didn't. And one of my big sales pitches to everybody is whether you use porters on the way up, I don't care at all. I don't have any skin in the game. It's great either way. But everybody should chip in and at least get partial portering for the way down after summit day, so that when you pack up, you don't have your pack all Boy Scouted out with 70 pounds of stuff staggering down that 6,000 feet, and your quads will thank you on the flight home with a little bit of portering on the way down. But yeah, I think in that being ready for that 55-pound pack is probably wise, and then hopefully it's a little less than that.
Man, you're making me cringe, Mark, because I'm thinking about my downhill carry from Camp 2 on my Aconcagua climb, and it was just me and one other guy, and we moved pretty fast. We were, sort of pre-acclimatized from some previous climbing, and we ended up bringing quite a bit too much fuel because we thought we'd maybe
Yeah,
spend longer up there. And so on the way down, man, oh, that's probably the single heaviest pack I've carried. We didn't, have porters, and I think we weighed it when we got back to base camp, and mine was like 85 pounds, and I was just torched. Wow, that was a hard downhill. So oh, I 100% agree with you. I think that's, man, if you have the chance to have porters on the way down and just help with those load carries, you're not just carrying your gear, it's like you're carrying your waste, your garbage, your human waste, any leftover fuel, all
yeah.
those things. We really want to
Yep.
try to leave as little impact on the mountain as possible. And these places do get a lot of traffic. So, sometimes your pack isn't losing weight. You think, oh, I've eaten my food and things like that. Yes, it might be a little heavier, it might be a little lighter, but you're adding the weight of waste and garbage. So yeah, no, that downhill heavy carry can be just torture. Uh, so yeah, well, thanks for taking us through that process. I think that really gave a good outline of the cache and carry rhythm. Climb high, sleep low, successively get up to those high camps at about 19.5, and then wait for a nice window for your summit bid, or hopefully you're not waiting at high camp. You've got a window picked out,
Yeah.
and you're only spending a night at that high camp before then an alpine start and getting up early to make your way toward the summit. Um, so I want to get into sort of the summit day experience, but maybe just as sort of a tangent, we could talk about a few of the main hazards on the mountain. I think that's an important one to cover. Um, you touched on earlier that this is generally considered a lower technical difficulty mountain, and I think for that reason it gets a little underestimated in terms of the hazards.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, like what are a few of the big hazards to keep in mind, Mark?
I mean, I think the biggest overarching one always on Aconcagua is altitude and altitude related sickness that you need to keep an eye out for. I mean, that's, like we spoke about, it's effectively 23,000 feet. It's a lot of people's first foray to those altitudes. So, that a lot of that has to do with pacing of the trip prior to that. And hopefully you've gotten that right. But just, keeping your eyes out for each other in the group for signs and symptoms of altitude sickness. But like you mentioned, I think Aconcagua is actually a little bit sneaky and underestimated with some of the other hazards because it doesn't kind of smack you in the face with these hazards like when you go to Mount Vinson, people are worried about frostbite because it's going to be like 40 below there. But I've seen more frostbite actually on Aconcagua probably than anywhere. Um, and it's not that it's actually that ridiculously gnarly. It's that it's can be a little bit gnarly and people aren't prepared for it. So making sure that you're ready for the cold, and in particular, when I think about cold on Aconcagua, I think about wind because it can be a pretty windy mountain, and it can be a windy mountain on what otherwise is a nice day. Like it's a nice sunny day, the visibility is pretty good. You think it's appropriate to go up, and it may be appropriate to go up, but it still can be quite windy. So you need to be prepared. Warm boots, warm gloves, the shell layers if you need it, and the ability to cover your face effectively. Goggles, face masks, etc. I think is huge to kind of prevent that. But I think that's a big hazard. And then a second hazard I would say is if it has snowed recently, or if there's still a lot of seasonal snow left from the winter. It's not a super steep mountain, but it is steep enough if you fall on snow, if you fall on a snowy bit of it, and you are not effective at self-arresting with your ice axe, you can slide quite some distance. And there can be significant hazard in that. There's been some horrible outcomes with that. So make sure you understand what the snow conditions are and make sure that your skills and your tactics for that are appropriate. Because it is just steep enough in sections that, if you lay down in Gore-Tex on the windboard, all of a sudden you're going 30 miles an hour. So, be well aware of that. And then the last thing I would say with a hazard, and this is not a sort of obvious hazard, but summit day is just long on Aconcagua. I think it's mostly because of the altitude. It actually is kind of longish in distance, and it's thought of as being like roughly 3,000 feet because sort of all these peaks that we climb have 3,000 foot summit days, but it's actually a little bigger than that. And it's sneakily long. And what that translates to at that altitude for a lot of people is a long day in time, increased fatigue, and a sort of a sets up the equation to maybe swim out a little farther than you can easily swim back. So, making sure starting off that your training is ready for that long day, but then also having some fairly concrete ideas about pacing, where you need to be when, and if not that, ultimately just kind of a turnaround time, kind of in your back pocket that you want to abide by. And and we've all done it to some extent, but you get there and it's almost a turnaround time, but you're pretty close. So maybe you forge on a little bit. And in general, in Aconcagua, if you think you're pretty close, you're not that close. Like it's even when you do the traverse and you get to the cave and you're going up the Canaleta, which is the last stretch, and it's really only a few hundred vertical feet. I've had that take 4 or 5 hours round trip from the Canaleta, from the cave there. So being a little bit conservative if you feel like you're swimming out a little bit farther than you think is appropriate, is probably a good idea. So yeah, what have you seen down there?
Those are all really, really important reminders. I'll just piggyback on a few of them. And I think the wind is it's known for its wind. You hear the viento blanco, the white wind, because the wind can just rip across the mountain and carry snow in it. So you just see this from a distance, often a plume of snow being carried off Aconcagua. And it can be so windy that it just makes climbing unsafe and impossible. And that's
Yeah.
often one of the big factors that turns around expeditions or means that you can't even make a summit attempt is when the winds are high. You really have to have a window where the winds are at least, more moderate for relatively moderate. So yeah,
Yeah.
being prepared for that with face protection, all that, windproof clothing, good mittens and gloves, hand warmers, things like that. Yeah, I think that's really important. And then just the other thing to sort of piggyback on your point of the really variable conditions that you can get up there. And it seems like each season is a little different on Aconcagua. Some seasons it's really dry and man, you might not even barely walk on snow. You have maybe some sections of compact snow, but a lot of it is on, dirt or gravel. And then other years it can snow quite a bit and even be quite icy higher up. And yeah, I've worked with athletes that I've coached that, have had really, really challenging conditions up higher on the mountain, even, accidents that have occurred in members of their team because it was really, really underestimated how technical it actually became when like you said, that wind packed, hardened snow that can be really icy and just stopping at a rest break and not realizing like, whoa, I need to be aware of my surroundings and really make sure I'm still secure on this mountain. Because you can get some speed up really fast and go a long way. So yeah, don't underestimate it just because you see online it's a hike. It can be really, really challenging. So yeah, I think, and then like you said, the exhaustion of altitude in a long day. The summit is optional. Getting down is mandatory. It's a round trip. It's a 360. You got to get back to camp. So make sure you have a little reserve of energy in the bank. So yeah, not to stomp on your points, Mark, but just agree completely with everything you said there. So, uh, and you already touched on a few of the sort of landmarks on Summit Day, but maybe we'll just kind of give a little bit of an idea of what it's like on Summit Day, give a feel for what this is like. Usually you're making an alpine start, maybe not as early as some other mountains, but often pretty early in the morning. Wake up and get some food and fuel in your body, get some liquid in, maybe a hot drink. Make sure you're packed and ready to go, and then start the climb toward the summit. Um, yeah, like usually starting say 2, 3 a.m. often on Aconcagua, or is it later sometimes that you guys are starting?
Yeah, I kind of evolved that a little bit over my guiding career down there. One of the things that I think can either be a hazard and or can turn people around, if they're smart about it, is is being really cold right at the outset, right? Because it's starting out with cold hands and cold feet, and then merging into the darkness, where there's no warmth, and then climbing up into the wind is a little bit of a tall order to stay warm. So I kind of started to view that as one of the sort of hazard slash major hurdles for people summiting successfully, who didn't have any other issues going on. So I used to start a little earlier, and then I kind of started starting a little later.
Hmm.
Where I would maybe start around 5 in the morning. Sometimes it, of course, this is weather dependent. This is also a bit dependent on how quickly you anticipate your group moving. Um, but yeah, it is one that I would start maybe just a little later than some of the classic like alpine starts that we think of in the Pacific Northwest. Where you're anticipating the snow conditions deteriorating with the warmth over the day, and you're kind of trying to beat that to the punch. It's plenty cold on the top of Aconcagua, so you're not worried about the snow conditions deteriorating. But yeah, we're certainly alarms in the dark, sparking the stoves, hot drink, and then trying to get everybody to start out as warm as possible to set them up for success. And then ideally, you only need to climb for an hour or two before the sun creeps up over the horizon and kind of hits you. And the first pitch up to Independencia, you are kind of in an aspect where the sun hits you fairly early, right when it comes up, which is nice when this first sun rays hit you and warm you up. And then commonly you're a little bit sheltered from the wind on that first part of the day, which is great because that's also can be the coldest part of the day. And then once you pass Independencia and you pop up, there's a big traverse over to the cave, and it takes a couple of hours. But commonly you're kind of head on into the wind there with the prevailing wind direction from the west, and it's a lot of times it's kind of quartering you on your right side. So this kind of right side of your nose and right cheekbone is always it's a really common area to at least get a bit of superficial frostbite if you have any uncovered skin there. So just making sure that you're doing your due diligence, you're covered up there. And I would also, it's a fairly non-technical part of the climb. So a lot of times too, I would either just have one axe or one trekking pole in my left uphill hand, and I would just be covering the side of my face with my mitten, just to literally shield the wind as you walked across there. If it's kind of one of those 50-50 days. And then you get to this kind of famous cave, the Cueva, and this is the base of the steepest pitch up this sort of couloir up to the top. And you're actually fairly close in lineal distance to the summit, but you're still a couple of hours at most folks' pace from the summit there. So the cave is kind of the classic place to like stop, make sure you get some good food and water in you, take stock of your situation, make sure that forging on is a good idea based on your time plan. And just kind of getting your act together. And that's also a common place where if you haven't had crampons on before, a lot of times you're cramponing up there, maybe getting the ice axe out initially, because it does tend to hold the snow in there a little more, and is a bit more technical. So yeah, and then all of a sudden you pop out on the summit, and you can see that what feels like half of South America, and then just being really, I think, conscientious and cautious about that first part of the descent coming down the Canaleta. That's where obviously most accidents happen on the descent, and on Aconcagua, most of the problems are getting down that bit because it's the steepest, it's the most technical, it's obviously the highest in elevation. And once you get out of there, things start to get less technical, getting down to thicker air, and hopefully things unfold to be a little more expedient for the rest of the descent.
That's a perfect trip through the landmarks of the summit day. Thank you, Mark. That was awesome to follow along there. The Independencia hut, the long traverse, the protection of the cave, and the nice long break there to refuel, and then the Canaleta, that steep last part that seems not very far.
It's not.
I remember, yeah, I remember looking at that and thinking, oh, the sun, I could see it. It's right there. Oh, that's only going to take me, half an hour to climb up there. No, like you said, oh, a couple hours of really slow movement at that extreme altitude now. And I think it's, just as an overview of the summit climb, it's about 1,000 meters from high camp, 3,300 feet or so. It's only 4 miles, which might surprise people, but you're not traveling a ton of distance. But the pace at this altitude and with this steep terrain, it needs to just be really methodical. The beauty of having a guide is they know how to set a perfect pace to time out the day well. Um, and yeah, if you can just settle into that and know, hey, keep yourself mentally strong from the cave forward, because it's really easy to underestimate the Canaleta and think it's just right there. And no, no, it's still quite far to get to the summit. If you're able to get up there, that last little crest over the top onto the very nice, flat, wide summit area is a wonderful feeling. Anyone who climbs mountain knows what that feels like. The view from the top. I mean, why do we climb mountains? Just for the view, really, right? That's the
Yep,
only reason. So,
absolutely.
um, man, take it in, take some photos, celebrate with your team. It's a magic experience.
Yeah, it's so great up there, and I really find too these longer expeditions, and this is for some people, this is the first what I think of as true expedition style climb, like a lot of folks have done. You just have so much into it at that point. It can actually be a a pretty emotional experience for a lot of people. I think surprisingly for them. And I think emotions tend to run a little bit high. I think for physiological reasons at altitude. But yeah, you have so much skin in the game at this point. It's a pretty moving and special experience for people. So I hope that a lot of our listeners get to go down there and experience it for themselves.
Absolutely. And as coaches, I know you agree with this, Mark, but we get a lot of joy from seeing people that we work with reach a
Oh,
summit, and not just reach the summit, because it's not just about the summit. We know that it's about the experience and challenging ourselves and your teammates and the journey along the way. But to be able to share in a little bit of that amazing feeling when someone climbs, the highest peak in South America, man, we're fortunate to be coaches to get to feel a little bit of that, and kind of vicariously through our athletes. So yeah, it's a great experience. It's an amazing mountain, and being up there on the summit is special. And then, hey, it's time to get down. What's next? We gotta get down this mountain. Heck, you think it's over? No,
yeah.
not now. The hard part of getting all the way back to base camp. Not that same summit day, but usually, what would do you try to get back to high camp, Mark, or sometimes even go to camp two?
Yeah, occasionally I have on just a couple of occasions, and they've been private trips where I've gone down to camp too. It has some benefits to not have to spend another night up at that higher elevation. People sleep a little better, it's a little warmer, etc. But in general, I would say most folks they have their hands full just summiting. I should say just, but summiting round trip from high camp is hard and it's a long day. Um, and it's not technically super hard, but there is a little bit of terrain to negotiate your way down out of high camp there and get down to camp two. And I just kind of like everybody to be on their best possible legs. And a lot of times that's not the case after a long summit day. And then the last thing is just strictly from a, kind of a work logistics standpoint. You have to tear down camp, pack all your things just to unpack them all again to put camp back up at camp two, just to tear it down the next day and go down anyway. So it's one less camp, sort of pack up and re-establish you have to do. So I'm kind of a fan of just spending that summit night at high camp. Doing your level best, which is a challenge for a lot of folks to get some fuel in you when you get down. I would try and commonly cook like a ramen soup dinner that had some hydration component to it, something pretty simple, put some of that fuel back in, get as good a night of sleep as you can at 19.5, wherever you're camped there. And then sleep in a little bit, let the sun hit the tent, warm up a little bit, get up in the morning, pack things up, and then Amazingly, yeah, you can do the, whatever it is, 5,500 feet all the way down to base camp the next day. And uh, it is one of the bigger descents that you do in that amount of time, probably anywhere in the world, because it seems long at the moment, but it actually is a limited number of hours it takes you to get down there. And then the amazing thing always to me was how thick the air would feel at 14,000 feet when you go down. This environment that you were to some degree probably struggling in the initial days when you first got up there now just feels like sea level, and the appetite that you didn't even know you lost comes back. And you can just, if it's not moving, you're thinking about eating it. And you sleep like a baby that night there in general, just at that lower altitude. So it's a really kind of cool little physiological experiment in how much the altitudes affect you and how much it comes back when you drop down even to 14,000 feet. And then not to get ahead of you, but my kind of last thing that happens a lot on these as you're kind of closing out these trips is a lot of people that do pretty good on the self-care end for most of the trip, thinking about the summit. They're eating, they're drinking, they're applying sunscreen, which is huge on Aconcagua. That kind of goes out the window with their at the end of the trip, after you've kind of had your summit attempt. And I've seen a lot of people really get beat up in those last couple days going down from the summit down to base camp, and then the long walk out if you're walking out from base camp the following day. It's a good time just to kind of stay on top of those things with sunscreen, with lip balm, with hydration, because you're not to the trailhead till you're at the trailhead. And I've definitely seen some crazy like sunburns that just happen in those last couple days. So just kind of stay on top of those things for the egress out to the trailhead for sure.
We always let our guards down on the descent one way or
100%.
another. It's a
Yeah.
natural sort of mental trap, I think. And I remember the descent, yeah, exactly, like getting sunburned, often developing blisters on the way down, and just sort of pounding your feet with weight on your back, getting that
Yeah.
long descent back to base camp. But shoot, you get back to 14,000 feet in that thick air and you're feeling good. It's time to do a long hike back to the trailhead the next day and then go celebrate with your team with some of that Argentine steak and Malbec. It's a great way to
Absolutely.
celebrate in Mendoza. Actually, and I don't know if this is common anymore, but on my trip out, we actually paused partway down the hike out from base camp and had a traditional barbecue there with
With our
our
arrows.
yeah, Herreros, exactly. And like that was amazing, man. Like they just put a big chunk of meat over a fire and we're cutting off pieces and handing it to you, with a piece of bread. And you're just
Yep.
sitting around the fire telling stories, drinking a boxed wine. And
Yeah. Some
so does that
Termador in
happen
a box.
anymore? Does that
Yeah,
happen
and
anymore?
there's a little bit of it does typically if you come out the normal route, people will come out in a day. And
Yeah.
and and sometimes all the way to Mendoza, sometimes spending another night at Horcones at the hotel. I used to do that a lot. Um, if you come out from Plaza Argentina, just because the lineal distance is greater on that side, on the Polish Traverse side, it's really common that people will do what was the last 2 days of the approach in one day, and they'll stay at that same first trekking camp, which is Pampa de Leñas. Um, and then they'll spend the night there for a last night, yeah, with the mules and the mule drivers who are carrying your stuff out, and have an Argentine asado barbecue there. I used to guide the Traverse a lot, so I'd come out the normal route. I only came out that way a couple of times, but I really enjoyed that last sort of evening on the, still sort of on the mountain on that trek out with folks like you're saying. And you're light then because the equipment's on the mule, so it's easy days as far as walking goes. The big pack is off your back, and the sort of pressure of the trip is behind you to some degree, and yeah, those are some really pleasant memories, sleeping under the stars there on the way out. Half of the stars which are unfamiliar to you in the southern sky, and you're looking up wondering what those constellations are. It's a pretty amazing experience for sure.
Oh, awesome. Oh man, you're throwing me back to my experience there. So it's a great memories from my trip there. It's been fun going up and down the mountain with you, Mark. I think we've covered everything, folks, but um, if you'd like more information, if you need help training, anything we can do for you, we're here to help. We have many wonderful coaches at Evoke, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us through our website, our forums, our social media accounts. We're always happy to help and provide as much information to the outdoor community as we can. Thanks for joining me, Mark, and it's been fun. It's been fun to climb Aconcagua together.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, Leaf, and I would echo that. It's climbed in our winter, but the calendar days roll by. So if you're thinking about a climb coming up here, and in 5 6 months, and you're not already completely on top of your training, now might be a good time to seek out those resources if you need them.
We'll look forward to hearing from you. Thanks, everyone, and happy climbing, happy trails.
Bye, everyone.